I'm excited to have a fantastic conversation today with a great topic around overcoming the trials in clinical trials. So I think that's what we're going to talk about today. And I've got a great guest. Dan Evans is here. He's come all the way from Australia, of all places, and we're going to talk about why he's what he's doing in Australia, why clinical trials are a big deal in Australia. And we're going to have a great discussion today. So welcome to the Good Medicine Podcast. It's wonderful to have you here, Dan. Dan is is a director at Southern Star. Is it Southern Star Research?
Southern Star Research.
Southern Star Research. And Southern Star is a clinical research organization. So if you don't know what that is, it's a company that helps other companies run clinical trials. And so we're going to talk about the process of how all that happens. And for those of you that aren't in this industry and don't understand how a drug goes from discovery, which is kind of where I spend a lot of my time, is thinking about how we take scientific ideas and turn those into things that can actually be therapies that we can use to treat people, and how we get through the laboratory side of things. A lot of us spend a lot of our time and effort there, but then there's a whole nother side once you start getting into human testing, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Is how do you translate into the clinic and start treating real people with a drug, and what are the challenges that are there, and how we're trying to address some of those challenges. So Dan spent a lot of years working on the complexities of clinical trials and helping to bring innovative new therapies into the clinic. So it's an honor to have you here. And I think we'll just start out to say, how in the world did you end up wanting to do this? And how did you end up getting involved in clinical trials?
First of all, Dave, thanks for having me on, and really appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. But I suppose my story goes back to how I first got to Australia in the first place. So I'm not originally from Australia. Okay. I'm originally a British citizen, and then I moved to Australia probably about 10 years ago now. And after a bit of backpacking and traveling around the coast of Australia, my now wife showed me a job opportunity that she found online, and it was offering sponsorship. So basically what that means is the Australian government will essentially keep you in the country and allow you to stay, which is what I wanted. I didn't have a visa at the time, or a permanent residency, green card, whatever you want to call it. And I really wanted to stay in the country. And it was a role in a sector that I was really interested in, which was life sciences. Mm-hmm. And that job was as a headhunter for an executive search company in the life sciences space. So that was about 10 years ago, and I got that job, managed to do really quite well to begin with, and you get exposed to multinational pharmaceutical companies, multinational clinical research organizations, small biotech startup companies from around the world, companies that are really on a shoestring budget trying to find their leaders and their C-suite and really pull together the heads of departments. And I really enjoyed being exposed to that area. Eventually, I moved into a space where I was hiring the C-suite of these organizations, so for US firms as well. I wasn't just doing it for Australia. And then an opportunity came up roughly 5 years ago with an entrepreneur that I've been doing some executive search for his groups. He's a physician, and he was starting up his own CRO company in Australia. And he headhunted me for the head of business development for that organization. So that kind of put my feet into the fire, so to speak, in the world of clinical development. And I had some brief peripheral knowledge through my headhunting experience, but really thrown into the deep end of learning how a drug makes it from, like you said, the preclinical discovery stage into first in human, and everything in between, the regulatory side, the CMC manufacturing side. So I learned pretty quickly and developed a knowledge through my own personal time as well. And then an opportunity came up several years later with a more, stable and established CRO in Southern Star Research. And I knew the founder incredibly well, both of the founders, Dr. David Lloyd, and I couldn't pass at the opportunity. So I then joined Southern Star Research, and since then I've been loving working with US biotechs, and US biotechs make up roughly 70% of our client base, and we help them get from that stage of preclinical into the first in human and conduct their phase 1 first in human studies.
Well, that's great, and I guess that's a great segue and introduction into, I would think that most people that are listening to this conversation are probably thinking about, well, what in the world are U.S. companies doing in Australia? And so we'll talk a little bit about why Australia has actually become a very interesting and a very hot place for doing some of these studies. And maybe just as a preface to that, clinical trials, as you mentioned, there's kind of a whole industry that's wrapped around supporting clinical trials. And the reason why is there's very specific things that have to happen in order to qualify to take a drug into human testing. And it's not something that you can just pull a chemical off the shelf downstairs and say, I wonder what this does to people. There's some prescribed things that have to happen. And we've learned over a lot of years, some of the important things that we need to understand before we move into people. And clinical trials are not all the same as well. There's the early stage studies are a little different than what we do later on. And I think what the majority of your focus is probably more on early stage, the first trials that are done. And most of the time, the first clinical trials are really focused on trying to establish safety, to say, does this drug actually do something bad to people, and how much can we give somebody without seeing any kind of bad side effects, and what is the profile of the drug, of how fast does it get absorbed into the body, and how fast does it go away, and how is it metabolized, all those things. So when we think about the challenges or the trials with trials, or the trials with clinical trials, one of the hard things is that the steps that we have to go through to qualify to say, this drug is ready to go into people, and there are several stakeholders that are usually involved in that. So there's a manufacturing component where we have to show that we can make the drug in a way that is reproducible and doesn't have contaminants, doesn't have things that are going to cause problems, known problems to people. So when we say we're giving you this drug, we know exactly what we're giving you. It's not 50% of this thing is this. We know exactly what every component is in the pill or the injection that somebody's taking. And so there's that manufacturing side, and then there's the toxicology side to say, here's what we know about the potential side effects of this drug. And so classically, I think U.S. companies would go through the process of determining both of those things. So they'd figure out, this is how to manufacture the drug, and here's what the safety profile looks like before we go into people, what we know in animals and other model systems that we've tested it in. And then there's a engagement with the regulatory agencies. So in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, and there's a application process that you have to go through to show the FDA, here's what we know, and here's what we figured out, and we check all the boxes to say this could go into people. And then you have to engage a clinical site, and with that clinical site, there's usually a clinical research organization that kind of helps mitigate or mediate between the company and the doctors that are actually treating the patients. And so there's a lot of complexity in all of this. And I think what's happened in my career, I've seen, in 30 years of doing this, it's gotten more and more complicated and more regulated, and that's created complexities for little companies, because I think you and I were chatting just before this that the hardest thing for us is time.
Yes.
We can't get more time. We can get more money. So we can always get more money. We can't get more time. So it costs a lot to run a clinical trial, but the hardest thing is the time. And so with all those boxes that have to be checked, you can imagine it creates complexity, and complexity usually translates into time. It takes a lot of time. So I think maybe 15 years ago or something, somewhere in that ballpark, Australia was kind of an afterthought in the drug development world. There weren't a whole lot of clinical trials being run in Australia, and
True.
I think that Australia today, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's a pretty good percentage of the first in human studies are done in Australia, and so companies like your company have become really great partners to work with for little companies like us, like the companies I work with. So I guess with that background, so tell us, how did Australia figure that out, and how did they bring people there to say this is a good place to run clinical trials, and why would a company like the companies that I'm involved with, why would they want to go to Australia to have clinical trials done?
Yeah, good segue into perhaps giving the audience a preface of how Australia is advancing the clinical development space for a global biotech, not just homegrown Australian biotech, but biotech all over the world. And just to give the audience some background, you may or may not know about Australia from what you've seen in Crocodile Dundee or various different movies.
Yeah, that's probably what most people know about it. There's a lot of surfing going on there and things like that. Yeah,
barbecues.
Barbecues, that's right.
That's pretty much the be all and end all, I think.
Yeah.
So we're a population of about 27 million people, a landmass which is the size roughly of the United States, probably a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
95% of the population is located around major cities on the coast. So for accessing patients, major hospitals and clinical sites, it's easy.
Yeah.
It's easy to access those patient populations. But in terms of medical advancements and medical infrastructure, clinical trial execution and medical achievements, Australia really, really does punch above its weight. And for example, we developed the HPV vaccine, which is saved on count. You can't even count the amount of lives that's probably saved. We turned penicillin from its discovered form into the therapeutic form that we know today. Many, many different advancements. Keytruda, first in human trial, was done in Australia. So it's not just these small biotechs that benefit from the Australian ecosystem. So if you turn the clock back, like you say, David, 15 years ago, Australia wasn't really known as a major player in the early phase clinical development space. We were actually founded 15 years ago, so we've rode that curve since then. But now we're, according to the latest data, we're number 3 in the world for phase 1 clinical trials after the USA and China. But obviously you guys have much, much bigger populations than ours. But we overtook the UK, which was seen as a global leader in phase 1, and we're actually above the UK for phase 2 as well. So the Australian government decided that we're never going to be in a place to commercialize the drug and for these biotech sponsors from around the world to make millions and millions of dollars. That's not going to happen with a nationalized health service and a small population. So the Australian government decided to focus on the innovation and give our population access to the latest innovative treatments, as well as creating a framework to allow early biotechs and pharmaceutical companies to thrive in that early phase, particularly the phase 1, first in human, and phase 1Bs. So they came up with an infrastructure where they will support the application of the clinical trial in an expeditious manner, and they've essentially delegated the responsibility of assessing whether your clinical trial can go into humans, removed the oversight from the regulator. So you simply notify the regulator that you're doing a trial. You don't apply to the regulator as you would do with an IND and wait for their correspondence. They give that responsibility and that oversight to our Human Research Ethics Committee, or HREC, what Americans would know as an IRB. And they do a scientific and ethical review, which is held to a higher responsibility than what an IRB would be here, because they know that the onus is on them to approve or deny the clinical trial, whether it can go in humans or not. So that pathway that the Australian government have created allows you to get an acknowledgement from the regulator within 5 to 10 working days versus, I think it's 30 days for the US.
Yeah. BioHive is a nonprofit building the future of healthcare innovation right here in Utah. As one of the nation's fastest growing life science industries, they bring together scientists, entrepreneurs, students, and companies to create breakthroughs that save lives and strengthen our economy. Whether you're in a lab or at a startup, BioHive is here to build, brand, and bring together a thriving life science community, and there's a place for you. Learn more, get involved, and see their latest happenings at biohive.com. And it's 30 days to get the first comments, right? And
Yes.
then, and once you get the first comments, then there's another 30-day clock, and you can go multiple rounds of comments. So it says 30 days, but it's never 30 days. So they'll get you a comment back, but usually you have to respond to that, and then you get another 30 days. So yeah, it's very, very different. Yeah.
And the cost for an IND, I've seen a few in my time, but the cost can be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the actual documentation burden is significant. Whereas how it's done in Australia is you go down the HREC application route, which takes 4 to 6 weeks. You can achieve approval in 4 to 6 weeks, and the documentation burden is extremely low in comparison. So you don't need your Module 3, Module 4, CMC dossiers, which for the audience this is what you have in your IND application. All you need in Australia is your clinical protocol that's finalized, your investigator's brochure that's been signed by your selected PI, principal investigator, and your patient-informed consent form. Now, that's from a high level. There is other smaller documents, but what that allows you to do is just get started much earlier in the piece, which is critical for early-stage biotechs that have investors that are pushing for speed, cash runways that are shortening day by day because there's no revenue coming in. All of the problems that many of the audience will know anyway. But essentially, this platform of speed allows you to get started much earlier. So what I mentioned earlier about the modules 3 and 4, you can't skip safety and non-clinical data. And you can't really skip CMC compliance too much. But for phase 1, you can provide product that is GMP-like. And what does that mean? I'm not a manufacturing expert, but what I know is that GMP-like means that you can have accelerated stability versus full stability, which can cut significant time. The cost burden is lower with GMP-like, and it's a self-certification. So you self-certify that it's been manufactured in a GMP-like setting. So for early-stage biotech, that's another advantage to getting it into patients and into healthy volunteers sooner. Non-clinical studies, there's no shortcuts there. So you cannot shortcut any safety studies at all. All of the typical PK ADME toxicology studies that you would do anyway for an IND. But what you can do is provide draft reports rather than the full audited, finalized reports that are ratified by toxicologists and various different parties that are very expensive. You can submit draft reports in your HREC submission to the Human Research Ethics Committee, and they would do their review. And if the principal investigator has signed the IB, which contains these draft reports, then the comfort level is a lot higher for the HREC. So in short, the speed element that the Australian government has created and is backed by industry is one of the main players and one of the main pull factors for biotech across the world, because you're saving time, but you're also saving money. Because the cost of that IND is much more significant than the cost for the HREC submission and the CTN, the clinical trial notification, which is about 490 Australian dollars.
That's a lot different for sure. So it's just been a dramatic sea change for us, obviously, to be able to reduce that complexity. Because you think about it, when we're building a clinical protocol, so essentially what a clinical protocol is just saying, this is the drug that we have. Here's how it works. Here's what we think its mechanism of action is, and we want to treat patients with this drug every day or once a week or whatever it is. We prescribe and say this. We're going to assess this. If it's a pill, we're taking this orally. If it's injectable, we're putting it under skin or in the vein. You're just outlining all those things, and one of the interesting things that happens, and this happens, I think, with every regulatory body in the world, is as it gets bigger, and the US FDA has gotten a lot bigger. I think in the last 10 years, it's probably more than twice the size as it used to be. There's more voices, there's more people weighing in. And one of the things that I've seen is the complexity of the protocols that you end up with, because you have a lot of people weighing in and saying, well, what about this? What if you think, trying this, or what if you want to look at this, and you should add this test and you should add that to. So there's never going to be a shortage of opinions of things that you should do. And I think one of the things that Australia's allowed us to do is to go directly to the principal investigator and say, listen, this is what we know about our drug, and we want to make this as simple as possible. We give this once a day, and we think these are the potential, make sure you look at this. We know that, the predictions that we have from the lab say we might have some GI tox. So you want to keep an eye on that, but you're actually talking to the person that's actually going to be treating the people, that's overseeing the volunteers or the patients that are coming in. And it just makes a whole lot more sense.
Yes.
Instead of having some third party, that's never going to be anywhere close to those patients, that has a lot of opinions about things, that says, well, you got to look at this and you got to look at that. And so protocol complexity, I think for us, directly affects patient recruitment, right? So the more complex the protocol is, we have what are called inclusion and exclusion criteria to say, these are the type of people we want to include, and we don't want to have these type of people on this study. And the more expansive those become, the harder it is to get the because now you're looking for a needle in a haystack, right?
Yeah.
You've got a very specific kind of person that you're looking for to put on the trial. So these things have just created a lot of challenges, and clinical trials have gotten more expensive and harder, and protocol complexity, patient recruitment, regulatory burden, all of those things I think are pressures that are put on us. And so I think the flip side of that is people say, well, it's there to help make sure these things are safe and help to make sure that we have good data quality. So I guess the big question is, what do we know about data quality and safety since Australia's made these changes? Have there been, experiences with say, oh, look at what happened. We cut some corners here, made it more streamlined, and we put people at risk. And is the data as good as it is running a trial in another place?
Great question, David. So just to take it from the top in terms of quality of data, roughly about 70% of new drug approval applications to the FDA contain some form of Australian data, whether that's from the first-in-human study or if it's a multi-site phase 2, phase 3 pivotal. That 70% of those applications do contain some degree of Australian data. And Australian data is probably second to none in the world. It's world-class research infrastructure, world-class hospitals, all to ICH GCP conditions. Everything that we do is geared towards FDA submissions, because roughly 90% of the trials going on in Australia are eventually going to pivot towards the FDA. Us as a CRO, 7-Star Research, we've never had a application or a protocol that we've designed that's been knocked back by the FDA, or a study that we've done that's been knocked back. So Australian data is held in extremely high regard by the US FDA. We've got a kind of a mirrored agreement with the US FDA, and we're aligned partners in that respect, the TGA in Australia and the US FDA. We recognize their approvals, and vice versa. There's fast tracks to get products commercialized in each country. In terms of safety, has safety been jeopardized since we've had this kind of speed aspect that's been introduced? We haven't had a single death in a phase 1 person-human clinical trial outside of oncology, as far as I'm aware, in the past 15 years. The clinical sites, particularly the phase 1 units in Australia, there's currently 7 or 8. There might be another one that's opening up in Sydney, are incredible units. They're heavily monitored, rigorous monitoring by 24/7 MDs that are available, obviously monitoring on site from the clinical team. And we don't escalate as quick as you probably do in the United States. We probably take a bit more of a cautious approach, probably due to the fact that we do have that quick approval scheme. So we do take a little bit more of a cautious approach. So we can't dose as many patients as you would in the same day in the US. We escalate slower. So we do take safety as a priority. That's the absolute priority in all of the studies that we undertake. And touch wood, haven't had a death in 15 years. So yeah, it's a great place to do safe, quality clinical trials, which you can have full confidence that the FDA and the EMA and any major regulator would recognize.
No, that's so, and that's been our experience as well. So you start looking objectively and saying, I could do things faster and less expensive, and the data's just as good, and there's really no sacrificing any kind of safety. And I think it just speaks to the fact that sometimes the unintended consequences of pouring more regulations in the on top of things with the idea that this is there to make things more safe. They don't necessarily make things more safe. They're not going to potentially have the intended consequence.
I should probably also point out, David, that when a product is deemed more risky, so I would say 95% of the drugs that are going towards clinical trial do have this CTN pathway, which is the fast track pathway. If it's a gene therapy or something that's developed from bovine material or a cell therapy that's quite novel, then we would go towards a CTA, a clinical trial application, which is similar to your IND submission platform.
So one thing I admire about Southern Star specifically, and I think about the other, and we've worked with other partners over in Australia, is their commitment to doing things differently and innovatively, and the flexibility in trial design and operations. That it doesn't seem that it's as rigid as some of the other places that we've worked with, and so. For us, I think that we're always looking for trying to do something new and different, and trying to involve innovations in, potentially in looking at different types of endpoints on studies that aren't maybe the gold standard endpoints that things that have been done for 20 years. We want to try new things. We've got new drugs that have new mechanisms of actions. We want to see, can we use an endpoint that isn't necessarily the standard endpoint. And I think that there's a lot of push, I think, right now in doing clinical trials in different ways as well, decentralized clinical trials, using real world evidence, synthetic control arms on clinical trials, adaptive trial designs. So tell us a little bit about, so all of those things are kind of not the traditional way of doing things, but if you take it from a patient standpoint, if I'm a patient that has a life-threatening disease like cancer, for example, and if I want to participate in a clinical trial, and I'm told, hey, this is a trial where we're going to randomize you to a standard of care that's been there for 20 years, chemotherapy that's this, that we know what it looks like. And we're comparing that to some brand new shiny novel drug that has a new mechanism of action. And most patients, if they're going to participate in the trial, they want the new drug, right? They don't want to be randomized to the old standard of care. And so that's driving a lot of challenges in recruitment, because I think patients today are more informed. They understand more things, and a lot of patients aren't being driven to clinical trials because their doctor has told them they should participate. They're being driven because they've asked. They said, correct, I know you're running a clinical trial here on this drug. I would like to be on that trial. And those patients aren't really excited about the old school way of having a randomized clinical trial where I have a 50-50 chance of getting the drug. And just so everybody knows, as a drug company, if we're the sponsor of that clinical trial and the patient goes on to the trial and they drop off of that study after they go on, it actually hurts us. It's not like we can just replace them. If they've signed the consent and they've said they're going to participate and they decide not to, and a lot of them, and to be honest, I can totally understand why they don't want to, because if I'm signing up for a investigational trial, I don't want to be treated with the drug that's been around, or the combination of drugs have been around for 20 years. I want the new stuff. And so I guess it's been a challenge for all of us to say, well, how do we fix that problem? Because it is a problem. It's a real problem. Now that we have more and more established therapies, it creates problems with the new therapies, because we always have to compare them to what we have, right? Is to say, this is the standard, and here's our new drug. How does that compare? Is it better? Is it worse? And in what way is it better and worse? And the gold standard way of doing that is to do a head-to-head trial and say, here's the gold standard, and we're going to randomize every patient. So tell us what you're seeing in terms of and what Australia thinks about things like adaptive trial designs using real-world synthetic control arms. By the way, what a synthetic control arm is to say we're going to instead of enrolling the patient and saying, half the patients are going on this side and half are going on this side, we enroll the patient, we look at all of their characteristics, and then we look in a database to say, are there patients that look a lot like that patient that have been treated with the standard of care, that we know what their outcome is, and so synthetically we can create a control. So those types of things are kind of the cutting edge new ideas, and they're not. Everybody talks about them. Everybody, but it's still not in the normal way of doing things. And I think that you go to the EMA, which is the European regulatory agencies that oversees drug approvals in Europe, and then the US FDA. They'll happy to talk to you about those things, but when it comes down to it, they really just want you to run the old way of doing things. Yes. So tell us about what does Australia think about things like that? And is that, are you seeing more innovative trial designs happening in Australia? What if you could get rewarded just for being healthier? Meet Galvin, the company using the latest blockchain technology to reward you for taking care of yourself. They help with your mind, body, and soul like a personalized health assistant to track your progress and help you feel better. Galvin's G Plus app rewards you for exercise and assesses your mental health in under a minute using AI and over 2,500 voice biomarkers. If you're feeling off, G Plus gives you personalized power-ups, science-backed techniques to help you feel better fast. And here's the best part. When you prioritize your wellness, you earn crypto. Ready to level up your health? Use promo code GOODMED20 at checkout for 20% off. Download G Plus today at the Apple app or Google Play Store and start your wellness journey with Galvin.
Yes, in short, yes. So recently we've seen an influx, particularly within oncology, after the FDA announced the Project Optimus. Most of the oncology studies that we're getting coming through are now not designed in the typical 3+3 manner. It's what's called a Bayesian optimal interval design, BOIN for short, which is quite unorthodox. It means that you can do more with less patients, which the FDA is trying to do. They're trying not to have patients be dosed when it's not necessary. Obviously, some of these agents are cytotoxic agents with high degree of adverse events that are relatable as well. So we're seeing a lot more of those coming through. From a healthy volunteer perspective, the game has changed in that arena in Australia. So US biotechs in particular now, because they have to feed back news constantly to their investors, and the investors want to see an early efficacy signal. It's not just standard, straight, SAD/MAD PK studies. Now we're getting protocols that have a extended patient arm. So you're not just doing your straight bleed and feed studies with healthy volunteers, as they're called, coming in and you're assessing PK at several different time points. Now you're having 42 healthy volunteers randomized across the SAD and MAD, an extension of a food effect. Mm-hmm. So we can assess how the drug interacts with a high-fat meal. And then we're having an extended patient arm with either Alzheimer's disease patients, very popular at the moment, Parkinson's disease, lupus, is lots of autoimmune disorders are coming through. And it is becoming, it's quite novel to the sites, to the phase 1 units, because they're used to simply just rolling through the healthy volunteers, the backpackers, the students that want to earn a little bit of money and be reimbursed for their time. So they're not used to be sourcing patients with a specific indication, but they are getting better because they've realized that most of these phase 1 units are attached to a tertiary hospital.
Sure, yeah.
And the resources that they have, it can create a segue into enrollment into a phase 1 patient extension. So we're seeing a lot more of that coming through. Decentralized clinical trials are quite popular now, particularly where the patient doesn't need to be confined. We can do remote phlebotomy in terms of having the nurses come to your house and withdraw blood at your house.
And just so everybody knows, decentralized trials in the standard way of doing a clinical trial is we bring the patients to a single site. We do all the procedures at that site, and a lot of times we hospitalize them and keep them there. You know, they're on site the whole time, and that clearly creates a burden for some people and an obstacle to some people who want to participate, because I think a lot of people like to be at their own house. So I think we're trying to be smarter about can we do that without sacrificing the quality of the data and the controls that we need to have in the clinical trial. So with today's tools and with the use of data collection remotely, remote visits, telemedicine, all of those things, I think enable and make those things happen, potentially able to happen, right? So it's still early days for all of this stuff, but I think it's exciting, right? That there's the ability to kind of challenge the standard old way of doing things, and what I find exciting about working in Australia is that they've established this concept that we're willing to do things that aren't necessarily the old way of doing things, right? That they're come to me with rationale to say why this makes sense, and show me that it's not going to put people at risk. Because I think that at the end of the day, that's the biggest thing is you just don't want to, you want to be innovative, but you don't want to sacrifice safety for people. That's you've said that multiple times, that is the number one thing that we're concerned about, is not putting people at risk, and obviously not also compromising data quality, that we're going to get good information from it. If we're going to run this trial, we better be able to make sense of what's happening from there. Well, what do you see happening with AI in clinical trials? Is that something that you're already everything nowadays is artificial intelligence and putting artificial intelligence components into clinical trials. Is that already happening in studies that you're seeing? And what do you see like in the next 5 or 10 years, like with how things are going to change with that?
It's quite timely you mentioned that, because I saw the FDA release some guidance that they've implemented an AI tool within their protocol review.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
which can review a protocol within 6 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
Which is quite impressive. But at the same time, considering the churn at the FDA at the moment, the oversight on that, I hope is
hopefully it's still there. Yeah.
We are seeing AI play a much bigger role now. You've got in silico medicine models.
Yep.
You've got organizations that are using drug discovery models for discovering assets and molecules that will fit a certain target. You yourself have gone down that path.
Yep.
I'm working with another company over in the west coast of the US that their entire portfolio, and they've got hundreds and hundreds of different molecules, has come from AI. And they just did a major deal with a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company. And I just think it's going to help with getting drugs to market faster.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to assess whether this drug's going to work in humans or not, perhaps before even entering a first in human. And you're going to get a go/no-go very quickly. And it will allow you to reduce wasteful spend, stop the development of products that would never make it anyway, and focus on the ones that will, discover assets that will hit that target and maybe multi-targets at the same time. And we'll be able to do PK modeling and PD modeling prior to entering humans. So we really are at the precipice, I think, of this space. And I was at an organization yesterday here in Utah that was leveraging the AI large language model to their tech. And I just think companies that don't adopt this are going to be left behind.
I think so too. Yeah, it seems to be that's the direction we're going, and I think there'll be a lot of and there already is a lot of hype and some smoke and mirrors a little bit, but I see real changes happening and applying AI not just on the discovery and the development, but even in the clinical trial side of how we find the right patients and how we assess endpoints and all that stuff. So I think we're going to see a lot of interesting changes happening. So I think we're right up against the time here, but let me stop. If our listeners, if people want to get in touch with you, how do they find you? And just very quickly, what's the process of engaging to say, if you're a small biotech out there and you wanted to do a trial in Australia, what's the first step? How do they make that happen?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Probably should have mentioned one more thing, which is around the cost of clinical trials in Australia.
Yeah.
Because for small biotechs in the US, it can be a huge burden. These aren't small ticket items; they're in the millions of dollars.
Yep.
So costs in Australia, the US dollar to Australian dollar exchange is roughly 1.6. So you're getting 1.6 Australian. The operational costs of running a clinical trial in Australia are much lower than the US. And then you can factor in an additional benefit, which is what the Australian government offer in terms of non-dilutive funding or non-dilutive refund, which you can achieve if you set up the right entities and if you follow the right process. You can achieve up to a 43.5% cash refund on your entire R&D spend.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So you can literally achieve a clinical trial in Australia without the R&D tax incentive for about 60% cheaper.
Yep.
When you factor that in as well on top, it's a significant kicker.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So even more incentive. So
even more incentive.
Yeah, that's right.
In terms of getting started, like you mentioned before, the best port of call would be a CRO.
Yep.
So reach out to a CRO. They are your connector to all of the relevant parties. It's a little bit dissimilar to the US that we don't have the CRO and the site situated together. We're all kind of separate, but we all work together. So we work with all the labs in Australia, all the phase 1 units in Australia. We can connect you with accountancy firms to set up your entity company in Australia, connect you with the right people, tour you around the sites, get you quotes. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me after this. And my details, I'll leave them on the podcast description.
Excellent. That sounds great. Well, thanks so much. It's always great to we had the opportunity. You were in town and to grab you and have this conversation. I think it's one of the overlooked things about our industry. We spend so much time really focused on the science behind what we do and how we make these discoveries. But operationally, what you help us accomplish is equally, if not even more important to the actual delivery of these drugs to the people that need them. And so for us at developing good medicines, all about the whole process, right? It's one part of it is not any more important than the rest of it. So being able to conduct good clinical trials and safe and effective and rapid and cost effective, all of those things check all the boxes that we're looking for to move good medicines forward. So thanks for taking the time and coming on and looking forward to seeing great things happen all around the world, but what's happening in Australia and how that's helping move the whole field forward. So thank you so much for joining us.
No, I appreciate it, Dave. Thank you very much.
Great. That's it for today's episode of Good Medicine. Thanks for joining us as we explore the science and stories behind health, medicine, and innovation. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a great zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please click, follow, and leave a review for the podcast on Apple and Spotify. If you have questions or comments for me, please put them in the comments section on YouTube or reach out on all social media platforms at Good Medicine. Links are in the description. The best way to support the podcast is to check out the sponsors of the show. You can do this by looking at the links in the show notes. That's it for today. I'm Dr. David Beers, and we'll see you next time.